entire technical difficulty. All I did was close that and open it again.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. Anyway. Oh my gosh, okay. So. I need help. A billion degrees.
Everybody needs help.
Is that what did you get it from the library? Okay, yeah, very nice.
Okay. Hi guys. I'm gonna get started because I don't want to keep you. All right. So, organizing your closed memo, and I'm also going to go over revision. So, here are the parts, and I'm just going to kind of quickly go through them. If you guys have questions, let me know. So, we kind of covered this in class, but I just wanted to like reiterate basically so it really sticks in there. So, for your overall conclusion, like Professor Britta talked about, this is a conclusion on the narrow issue, your extreme and outrageous, that also relates to the big, broader issue of just intentional infliction of emotional distress. So you're not concluding on all four elements, though you can structure it that way. I think he talked about there's two different options there, so choose one and just go with it until he'll go over more in your conferences. And then umbrella rules section, then down to your thesis, then down to your focusing statement. I'm going to go over very specifically the umbrella rules section and what should be in there, how to make it flow. But basically, after you lay out the major umbrella rule, you're going to give the reader a focusing statement, narrowing the issue to exactly the one issue that's at hand, and then give your reader the thesis, your conclusion, prediction on that one. And then underneath the umbrella rule, after you've given them umbrella, focusing, and then thesis, you're going to do the rules that relate to extreme and outrageousness. You're going to start out with the more general rules as far as extreme and outrageous, and then move, general explicit rules rather, and then move from there into the more implicit rules. And some of those might need more explanation in themselves before you even get to the explanation section. So those are like, the umbrella is the big overall broad picture of IAED, and then your rule section is just the rules that relate to extreme and outrageousness conduct. And then after that, you move on to your explanation section, which is where you're going to be illustrating the facts, holding, and reasoning of the cases, I think 5 cases that are on the list. And then you're tailoring each of those to proving a specific legal idea, which you include in the first sentence of your explanation paragraphs. And then from there, you go on to the application section where you're applying the legal ideas that you just explained to the case at hand now. You're not introducing any new facts, no new law, just using the other cases, using analogies to either compare or distinguish them to show the reader how those apply to your case. And then you'll have your counter argument. Now, for this paper, you might end up having, or you will end up having, more than one explanation and more than one application section. So where do you put your counter argument? Do you put it after each application? Do you apply everything and then put it at the end? You can do either, as far as I know. So what you can do is like explain the case, do your application, and then suggest the counter argument right there, or you can wait till you've already applied everything and then list all of your counter arguments. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you do a counter argument for all the rules, or for each different explanation paragraph that you're doing, or is it all, should it all be in one?
Well, that's kind of the question I'm asking, because see, if you do it that way for each one, you can do it right after your application, like each application, but I guess for this, it might be better to just keep it all in one,
He
like,
said that.
just keep the counter
Well,
argument
he
at the
said we
end.
could do it the other way, but he like recommended for this
Yeah,
case that
then-
it might.
I would definitely
Yeah.
defer to whatever he said. If he says to put them all at the end, do all your explaining, then all your applying, then all the counter arguments in one spot then. Once you get further on in the semester, you can play with that. That's more part of large-scale organization, but for now, if that's what he said, do it specifically in this order, I guess. Does that answer your question? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Okay. And then obviously you'll have your conclusion, which is on the narrow issue, just the extreme and outrageousness, and you want to then relate that to the broader issue of IID. So, all right, no, I don't need that. Okay, so your umbrella rule section comes first, and you want to make sure that the umbrella rule section flows in a way that the reader will understand. You need to give them enough context so that they understand how they're being led to the narrow issue and how it relates to the overall broader concept. Because we have 4 elements here, so how are they? You need to give them enough background information so they know, okay, why aren't we looking at those other other three elements? So, let me see. Not too many or too few rules. So you don't want to like bombard them because there are 4 elements. I mean, you could, like we saw in the practice exercise in class, you could go through and explain each one, but we don't really need to do that because we're only looking at the one specific one, and it just kind of gets in the way. It makes it less like cohesive. It just gives the reader too much. But you can't also, at the same time, you can't give them too few so that they don't understand what the standard is. You just want to give them a broad picture, what is IAD, and then move down with your focusing statement saying, this, and this are not at issue, so for that reason we're focusing on just this one. And then, so that's where you're landing on just the narrow issue. And in just a brief way, try to explain to them why the other elements aren't at issue. That doesn't have to be a big explanation as to why they're not important. It's just, you're just like dismissing those, not at issue, and then here, focus on this one. So after you've given the rules, focus the reader on the narrow issue at hand, then you want to give them your thesis, which is your conclusion or prediction about that specific issue before you go ahead and dive into the explanation. So it's kind of setting up for the reader, like, this is what I'm going to say, and then you go ahead and explain it. Okay, so for the umbrella rule section, how do you figure out what rules you need? Ends means analysis means you're giving the reader enough context so they will be able to understand the significance of the narrow issue. Why are we even looking at that one specifically? Implicit and explicit rules give the reader what they know to reach a prediction on extreme and outrageous. Like, what is extreme and outrageous conduct? When does it exist? You have to give them the explicit rules that are explicitly stated in cases, but you also need to give them the implicit rules that you've synthesized to help them understand the standard more clearly. And then, so if you have a well-structured rule section, it will help you, especially when you're explaining the cases, because you can then explain in the order that you've structured your rules, which will make sense to the reader because that's the way you've presented it to them. And if your rule section flows well and goes in a logical order, it'll really help your explanation sections because you've already done that organizing, so you know what order you need to go in and which explanation paragraph should go where. So,
So an example of an implicit rule would be like the factor that they come up with in most of the cases, and an explicit rule would be.
What do you mean by the factor?
So like that would be the outrageousness factor that comes with all 4 of them, correct?
I'm not sure I know what you're saying.
So like, I'm just trying to get like a better picture of what an implicit rule would be opposed to an explicit rule.
Implicit rule is something that's not directly stated in the case. Explicitly stated rules, like in the case, for example.
When you say like a campaign that is already, have you already like read that there? That's
Yeah.
like explicit.
Like something that's directly stated in a case, yeah. Like if you could quote to it in a case, it's an explicit rule.
Okay.
If you couldn't quote this rule, but you know it and you've gathered that from the cases, that's an implicit rule. But again, it's something that has to be explained to the reader because it's not explicitly stated anywhere. They couldn't go look that up. So you'll have to state that for them. You have to just basically make the connections for the reader so they understand why one thing is important, even though it's not explicitly stated in a case.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? All right, let's see. Oh yeah, so I was kind of already going over this, but you want to make sure to give your legal ideas in the same, in your explanation section, give those ideas in the same order that you've set them up in your rule section. Let me see. And then while you're crafting this rule statement, obviously because the rules will come directly from cases, it'll help you consider which cases you can best use to illustrate the legal ideas you're going to explain later on. And then, let's see. And so, okay, the explanation and application sentences, or paragraphs rather, are all going to be structured around your legal ideas. So like we were talking about in class, you don't want to be structuring by cases and going by like, I'm going to do explanation on Bunker, then I'm going to do an explanation on Mitchell, or organizing it by that way. You want to do, this is the idea that relates to extreme outrageousness, this is the idea that relates to campaign of harassment, organized by those ideas, and if you do it that way, the cases will just sort of fall into place. You'll understand like, oh, well, in this case, there's not as much of a campaign, or in this case, there's a really strong campaign, or it lasted for a long time, whatever it is. Hi.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing well.
Okay. So now I have a little exercise for you guys. If there are no questions, any questions so far? Okay. So there's gonna be 5 statements, and I want you guys to just read through it, take a couple minutes, and then tell me what order you think they should go in, okay? Hi. If anyone thinks they know what should go first, feel free to raise your hand.
5.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Because it describes what, like the root of false imprisonment, like, so I think that's where it would start.
Okay, no, good. Okay. What do you think should go second? Hmm? 4? Okay. Why do you think that?
It's like establishing what are the elements of false imprisonment.
Okay.
So narrowing it down.
What do you guys think should go after that? Now that they know what the elements are. What would you call that statement if you had to name it something?
The focusing statement.
Good, because you're saying something that's already been established, so we don't need to prove that. We're just looking at another issue, actually. I shouldn't tell you that. But that's actually not what goes next.
Sorry, which ones are we established already?
Sorry,
Like,
sorry.
already
It is
lost.
confusing because we actually haven't gone there yet. So, okay, so the first sentence, you were
Is
right, would
5.
be number 5. Second sentence, totally right, would be number 4. But the third one is actually gonna be number 2, because that's, I guess that counts as an explicit rule because as far as I remember, I think that's explicitly stated, but that may also be an implicit rule because, what am I looking at? Reasonable person would not have felt free to leave given the circumstances. So that's not something that's in the elements, but it's still a rule that the reader needs to know to understand when something would make a person like know when they wouldn't have felt free. So the reasonableness standard is something extra that's not included in the umbrella rule that they still need to know, or it is in the umbrella rule, but it's not in the elements rather. But the reader still needs to know that. So it's information that you have to include because otherwise it's like an incomplete standard. So that's the third one. The fourth one would be the focusing statement, and then right after that comes the thesis, which is which one? 3, you say? Yeah, you're right. So yeah, therefore, and that's again, I'll go over this too, but that's a signal to the reader, therefore, hey, I'm saying something, therefore, this is my conclusion. So it's just yet another way to like make your writing flow so that the reader understands like what are they trying to say in the sentence. So you're starting it immediately, therefore, the only determination that needs to be made is this, and you're focusing them on that. Therefore alerts them that you're going to make a conclusion, and then you're telling them specifically what is that issue and your prediction on it. So good, okay. Okay, so now we're moving more onto the small scale within explanation paragraphs. So, like I said before, you want to organize by legal idea. And you don't want to try to give the reader more than one legal idea per paragraph because it just gets too, you can get in the weeds with that. So you just really want to do one legal idea per paragraph. So These always start off with the legal idea topic sentences, so you're stating a specific legal idea about an issue that you've extracted from a case. And basically telling the reader why is this case important? What is important about this idea? Why do we even need it here? Let me see. What am I saying? Okay, so you want to make sure you're giving them a complete illustration of each case. Facts, holding, reasoning is a really good formula to make sure that you've covered everything you need to cover. But you also want to make sure and be concise about this. You don't want to like restate the case. Just give them the important facts, what happened, and what did the court say, yes or no, it meets the elements or whatever it is, and why, in a succinct way, why did they decide that way? So then, let me see. And then, so after, when you're in your application paragraph going to apply this legal idea that you've explained, you want to make sure that you apply all of those legally significant ideas to the legally significant facts from the case that you're working on now, like your present case. So don't, like, if you're mentioning something in the explanation, something that you don't end up putting in your application, the reader might ask, like, well, why was it important up there? So if you have some kind of fact that you use to explain the case, you want to make sure to reiterate that and bring it down to your application and use an analogy to compare it to our case, because otherwise you've just included some fact about this case that's really not important. If you don't end up using it in your application section, why did it even matter to put it in there? So just make sure when you're illustrating the facts of the other cases, use those facts in your application section to compare it to our case and say why it meets the standard or doesn't. Let me see. Yeah, that's the cross-checking part that I'm talking about, cross-checking between your application sections and your explanation sections. Okay, and then yeah, make sure in the explanation paragraphs that you're citing after every sentence where you've derived the information from a source in both your rule sections and explanation sections. It's always better to oversight than to undercite. If every sentence has a cite after it, he can always tell you, like, okay, you don't need quite that many, but if you don't have it after any, or if you only have a few citations, that's technically plagiarism and that's bad. So we want to just oversight if you're unsure, just cite it. And also, please do the citations as you go along. Don't save them for the end. I did that myself. I would just write in bold and, you know, big letters, just cite, but then you end up with like this great paper and you still have all this work to do to go through and find where those citations came from. Unless you're meticulous and you have like a list of where they all came from, like that's just a really not fun process, so I don't recommend doing that. Okay, so your application paragraph. So in the topic sentence of your application section, you want to be applying the specific legal idea that you've just explained in the explanation section to the facts of our case. In a very simplified version, this would sound like X exists when Y, and that's the explanation, legal idea topic sentence, X exists when Y. Then in your application section, you would start that by saying X exists here because Y, and also because of key Y related facts. That's a really simplified way, but that's just like the kind of formula that you want to be using. And then let me see. So, okay, supporting facts, us versus them. So you, in your application section, you're leading with our facts from our case, but you're grounding the assertions that you're making about the facts in our case with comparisons to case law that you've explained above. Oh, I thought that was a hand, sorry.
Oh.
Let me see. So, and then be specific when making factual comparisons. Don't just say to the reader, this is like Mitchell, so it's met. You have to tell them why it's like, this is like the campaign in Mitchell because blah, blah, blah. So just be as specific as you can. Let me see. Also, a lot of people make this mistake, but try not to mix up comparing the facts of our case to the holding of another case, because the holding might be totally irrelevant. Like just saying that it did meet the standard, like kind of what I was just saying, that's not really helpful to the reader because they don't know which facts match up. So you have to just make those connections for them, facts to facts, and also reasoning to reasoning, not just facts to holdings. So, okay, so the reader might not necessarily understand why a statement is legally significant. If you've just given them the fact-to-fact comparison, you might then need a secondary statement, like a landing statement, to kind of ground the comparison. Like, this is similar to this other case, and that's important because it shows campaign of harassment or something like that. Okay, so yeah, try not, in your application sections, try not to just re-explain. If you find yourself doing this, it means you might not have explained the case adequately enough in the explanation section. If you feel like, oh wait, I need to tell them this fact, or if you're just like kind of re-going through, take another look at your explanation section and see if you've really concisely and completely explained that to the reader. Remember, facts, holding, reasoning, that's a formula. And then, okay. Yeah, again, no introduction of any new facts or anything that you didn't already explain. Explain all of the law that you use before you go ahead and apply it. And only use the facts that are in your explanation. Only use those facts in the application section. Okay, so these are some examples of transitions. I guess I will at least send you guys this slide because this is really helpful. So just if you're looking to use, these, basically they're demonstrating the flow of your paper to the reader. If they see these little signals, they know, like if you say moreover, they know you're trying to emphasize something or amplify it. So these can just be a really good way to like signpost your reader, and it helps you also with the flow of your document. Like you could even, for editing purposes, I would just bold all these words that you use in your paper, and that way like when you're going through for editing for flow specifically, or I should say revising for flow, revising for flow specifically, you'll be able to pick out and see if you use those transitions effectively. And if you see an area where you don't really have a whole lot, like maybe you could add some in to show the reader where you're going. It just kind of helps the reader like navigate the document a little bit better. Okay, so revisions. So these substance, structure, style, these are 3 separate revisions. Edit once only for the substance of your document, then for how it's structured, then the style. So like Professor Berta said, why would you edit the structure of something if it's material that substantively doesn't even need to be included? So that's why substance comes first. You want to make sure that the context and the substantive assertions that you're making are actually relevant to the issue and are something that you're going to want to include, because once you have all of that and you're sure that it's substantively okay, then you can start to edit it for structuring it and figuring out how to fit them all into your paper. So the first draft is for you as the writer. These thoughts are all in your head, you know all the cases, but getting it out is a different process. So whatever your first draft is, which as far as I know you guys have already done, but that's really for you, and just to get your thoughts out onto the paper, and then you can worry about fixing it up or organizing it later. It's just really to get everything out. And then revision isn't just about saying the same thing better. It's look over your entire document critically and ask yourself if it's convincing the reader of your position, like at kind of like a bird's eye view. It's not necessarily editing for grammar or punctuation yet. It's just like a overhead view of, is this convincing, like the document as a whole. And then let me see. Yeah, okay. So the first content, you want to revise content and analysis first. So have you analyzed the issues fully and completely so that the reader understands and likely will see where you're going with your arguments. Okay, yeah, so he just really wants me to remind you, substance, then structure, then style. Substance is most important. If your ideas aren't fully explained, I guess, in this document, there's really no point in structuring them. You can structure them as well as you want. If they're not convincing ideas, they're not going to convince the reader of your position or what you're trying to say. And then, so revision comes first, and then editing, which is the small scale. That's where the, some grammar, spelling, punctuation can come into place. And then polishing is last. That's going to be polishing of citations. What else am I trying to say there? I don't know. I think I have that later slide, sorry. What else do I have? Nope. That wasn't the last slide, but all right. Okay, so, sorry, technical difficulty. So this is just kind of like your final checklist. Okay. Most importantly, make sure you allocate enough time for this. Revision takes a long, long time, and especially if you find with your first draft, like, ooh, this argument just isn't that strong, maybe I could use a better one or whatever it is, like that might take some time for you to recraft an argument. So leave enough time for that. Edit for flow. For a better flow, you want to use the transitions like we talked about, the signposts, therefore, furthermore, moreover. And also, Professor Britta mentioned taking out your legal idea topic sentences and putting those on a document by themselves, and check those specifically for flow. Because those are going to be what appear at the beginning of each of your paragraphs. So if you take out those sentences individually without all the explanations, if you can find like a cohesive flow through all of those, your document will flow properly. Because I mean, that's just the best tool that I can offer to you is taking out those sentences, because you'll see things with those sentences next to each other that you can't possibly notice when it's all in the document and there's all this wordiness in between and it's like a huge paragraph in your face and you don't notice as much. So pulling out those sentences and checking just those individually is extremely helpful.
Would you recommend, like, in the future, starting out like your outline like that, or not?
That is exactly how I structure my outline. I start with just the legal idea topic sentences, and the facts that I'm gonna use, I just, like, 1 word, 2 words, tiny little like descriptions as far as in your outline. I mean, for Professor Bird's outlines, you definitely wanna get as close to like a full written document as you can, but for your first,
Yeah.
like, just rough sketch, definitely. Legal idea, like, whatever it is, like, you can even put, like, campaign, duration, whatever it is, and then craft your legal idea topic sentence. If those are spot on, your explanations will follow. Let's see. Or I meant your explanations will follow more easily if you've worked hard on crafting that statement is really what I meant. Okay, and then editing for unity, make sure you have only 1 idea per paragraph. Make sure you have legal idea topic sentences for every paragraph, and make sure that every sentence in your explanations, every sentence in your applications, and of course every sentence in your rule statement, make sure it relates to the topic at hand. Let me see, so editing for cohesiveness, that's where you want to make sure you're presenting information in a logical order. Don't give them information about, the duration if they don't even know about the campaign yet. Make sure you're introducing things in a way that will make sense. And also you want to try to shoot for a half page or less per paragraph, just for easiness of reading and flow. And you also want to make sure that your ending and beginning sentences for each paragraph, you want to make sure that they dovetail. Professor Britt always uses that word, and I didn't really necessarily understand what that meant until kind of like later on last year. So just to make sure that you guys know all of that, like dovetail is like this, like a dove's tail. So 1 sentence should flow and then immediately go into the next idea like that, basically. So that's where, like, for example, the most poignant part I can probably think of is like where you're gonna have your, like your umbrella rule, then your focusing statement, then your thesis. You want that to flow immediately into your first legal idea topic sentence. So that's, I would say, probably the most important dovetail, but it's important in every paragraph. You want your explanations to flow into your applications too, obviously. And then, so for polishing, when you're done with all your other revisions, you want to polish it, fix any typos, make sure your citations are flawless, and if you see that you've used excessive quotation, or at least look out for that the whole time, but here is where you can just polish and see if I've quoted something, is there a way I can paraphrase that, or do I really need this long of a quote? Just excessive quotation is a really big signal that it's a novice legal writer, so the less you have, the better. And then, yeah, like we talked about in class also, try to make sure you're using active voice. Don't hide the actor yet, you'll be able to do that next semester. But make sure you're using the active voice and be active with your sentence construction too. So don't write, and also avoid unnecessary padding. That's really, really important. It's really hard to do because it kind of, some of that sounds like it might seem like we need it, like courts have held that, but it's really unnecessary. And you might even want to do a read through of your document just for the padding, like just for looking for, what are the beginnings of my sentences, how am I starting those? So do you feel like you're like throat clearing language, like the things, courts have stated that, like you never need that, never. Just get it right out, get to the point. this is the standard. I think that's all I have for you guys. Do you have any questions? Nothing? Everything's going perfectly? No? What would you guys say you're having the hardest time with? Like, are you finding this easy? No? What's tough about it?
Getting the, like, the idea, the legal idea to be, like, for me to put in the words that everybody can understand.
So you mean like being clear enough?
Yeah.
Or,
But then, like, it has to apply to the like, facts, so it have to be supported. It's like, this is my idea, but there's not a lot of facts to support this. But then,
so you're saying like you're trying to assert a legal idea, but you don't really have a lot of facts that support it?
yeah.
If that's the case, you might have to consider whether that legal idea is a strong enough argument to even include in your paper. So, because if you know what I mean, like if you can't find enough cases that really support your assertion, and sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes you have an assertion that you want to make, but there's like no case law about it. Like, where do I find this? So, if that's the case, just consider the strength of your argument and consider if there's a stronger idea that you might come up with that would be more persuasive or more helpful. I don't want to use the word persuasive. More helpful to the reader in understanding. Anything else? How do you guys feel about citation? That lovely groan of the Blue Book. Yeah. I think there's still a document up on Twin that's really helpful. Like, did you guys go to I think it was Shayla that had the citation review. That, whatever PowerPoint that was, I'm pretty positive it's on Twin. That's so helpful. Like, I've literally been referencing it to see like, oh, where is this in the Blue Book? So, very helpful as far as that goes. Do you guys like? So you have a draft at this point. Have any of you started revision yet?
No.
Trying? No.
I feel like this
Nothing.
morning, or at least for me, the like class with Berto was like, what? If I hadn't had that, I still would have just been like wandering through the dark.
Yeah, right.
So
I know.
I feel like I needed that to even like go any further.
Yeah, that's true. It's like I don't want to revise this if I
Because
don't even know what I'm
really
doing
just
it.
didn't
Yeah.
know how to divide my two explanation paragraphs at first. Like, wait,
What do you mean? Tell me more about that.
I had like a completely I had a campaign,
Mm-hmm.
but like other things were just like I was just like making up stuff. That's
So,
what
like,
it felt like.
Yeah.
Not like making up, but it was like pretty
Right.
far off the mark, I would say.
Yeah, and that's I'm glad you bring that up because that's important because you want to keep the reader focused on this
Yeah.
legal idea. Like with some of these cases, like you can get out in these other little tandem explanations that aren't necessarily super relevant to our discussion. So like that is really tough. Yeah, but if you in explanation sections, following that formula, that facts holding reasoning, like just focus on the reasoning. What did the court think was most important? What's the most important fact that convinced them to ruling the way they did?
Okay.
And going through, like, I don't know how many times you guys go through these cases, but like, keep going through them. You'll notice new things each time you read the case. And something might pop out at you and be like, oh, that's why they thought it was a campaign? I thought it was because of this. Like, it's just like when you watch a movie, or like me, if you like freakishly rewatch things on Netflix. You notice different things every time you watch it. Like, your brain can't possibly absorb everything on the first go around. So if you're having trouble coming up with like, what legal idea should I use? Or like, go through the case again. All the cases, really. I would recommend going through those a few times. Sometimes I'll read a case like 3 or 4 times before I really get what I want to say about it. So, because it's hard, it's tough to come up with, like, how do I come up with a legal idea? It's not even stated. I'm supposed to come up with this rule, like, but that is our job. So, yeah, rereading, going through. Nothing else? Any random, nothing? No questions? I'm surprised. These papers will be good then. I'm hoping. All right. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna just stay here till when at 4:50. I mean, you guys can go if you want, but I'm still here if anyone has questions that they don't want to say in front of the group. I'm usually that person.
If you turn the camera off, Lena might have a question.
Oh,